Welcome back, everyone. Today we get a special look at an interview with the CEO of Google. Now, he was interviewed by Andrew Ross Sorkin. And one thing I like about this interview is that Andrew pushes hard on all the difficult questions. He doesn't hold back. He asked the CEO, Sundar, about the many new competitors to Google, all the AI companies, whether or not Google's business of search is really under threat. What about all the AI-generated content? Doesn't that make Google's search less valuable? What about the Department of Justice and the many lawsuits critical of Google? What's going to happen with all of this? We get to see the CEO's answer to all of these questions, and I think many of those answers are surprising. So we're going to be going through all the most important parts of this interview. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, to kick things off, he gets asked about one of their main competitors, which is Microsoft.
A quote from a competitor of yours that I don't think you're going to love, but I think you'll have a good answer to, which is your friend Satya Nadella at Microsoft said that Google should have been the default winner in the world of big tech's AI race. He said Google's a very competent company. Obviously, they have both the talent and the compute. They're vertically integrated. They have everything from data to silicon to models to products and distribution. And I'm so curious, he sort of put down the debate there, or tried to launch a debate there about where Google is. You guys were the originals. You were the OGs when it comes to AI. And sort of where you think you are in the journey relative to these other players, and whether you think you were or still are supposed to be, as he says, the default winner.
I would love to do a side-by-side comparison of Microsoft's own models and our models any day, any time. They're using someone else's models.
The gloves come off early.
The first thing he does is says, look, I'd love to compare our models from Google to Microsoft's own models, because of course, what Microsoft is doing is using OpenAI. They couldn't create their own models. They had no technology to do it. They didn't have the team to do it. So they partnered with OpenAI. They had to give them all sorts of different access to Microsoft Azure. Google's just saying, look, we compare models. I think that's a good response, a good competitive response. Google didn't have to go and partner with a third party to build their models. They built it themselves.
And you're throwing down the gauntlet.
No. I have a lot of respect for them and the team. Look, it's such a dynamic moment in the industry. I obviously, when I look at what's coming ahead, maybe we are in the earliest stages of a profound shift. We have taken such a deep full-stack approach to AI. We do world-class research. We are the most cited, when you look at Gen AI,
right,
most cited company in the institution in the world. Foundational research. We build AI infrastructure, and when I'm saying AI infrastructure, all the way from silicon, we are in our 6th generation of tensor processing units. You mentioned our product reach. We have 15 products at 500 million users. We are building foundational models, and we use it internally. We provide it to developers, over 3 million developers. And it's a deep full stack investment. We are getting ready for our next generation of models. I just think there's so much innovation ahead. We are committed to being at the state of the art in this field, and I think we are. Just coming today, we just announced groundbreaking research from a text and image prompt, creating a 3D scene.
It's pretty amazing.
And so the frontier is moving pretty fast. And, so looking forward to 2025.
So Sundar is here reminding Andrew of the progress that Google has made in artificial intelligence. But Andrew doesn't just take those examples. He hits back by putting more pressure on him, saying that, do you think everyone else has caught up now?
In the current, the current generation of LLM models are roughly, few companies have converged at the top. But I think we're all working on our next versions too. I think the progress is going to get harder. When I look at 25, the low-hanging fruit is gone. The curve, the hill is steeper. I think the elite teams will stand out in 25. So I think it's an exciting year from that perspective.
Now, what Sundar said here is so important. He's pointing out that right now, the current state of LLMs and all the different models are basically easy to get to. They're models that are now becoming commoditized. Most big companies can get to these models without too much difficulty. They just need to have a smart team and they need to have the investments to do so. But what's really going to separate different companies are the next iterations. Getting to the next point is going to be more iteratively difficult, and he even has a hand gesture of the curve going upwards of difficulty. So we're getting in a situation where making incremental gains is going to be more difficult from this point forward, and Sundar believes the team at Google will excel now above the competitors. Now they move on and ask him, what is that next step? What does it look like? What is the next most iteratively difficult thing for artificial intelligence to accomplish? And what Sundar does is he reinforces the point that Mark Benioff has been making, that it's agents. The same thing that Sam Altman has been saying, that this concept of agents which can complete complex tasks is likely the next iterative step for artificial intelligence.
The models are definitely going to get better at reasoning, completing a sequence of actions more reliably, more agentic, if you will. I think so. You will see us push the boundaries. So I expect a lot of progress in 25. So I don't fully subscribe to the wall notion. But when you start out quickly scaling up, you can throw more compute and you can make a lot of progress. But you're definitely going to need deeper breakthroughs as we go to the next stage. So you can perceive it as there's a wall, or you perceive it as there's some small barriers.
So the next steps in AI are going to be figured out by companies that really have the foundational knowledge, the talent to be able to make these breakthroughs. It's not going to come as easy as the first. Now, the next subject that Sundar is asked about is the concept of the innovator's dilemma. If you're not familiar with the innovator's dilemma, it's when a big company that has some big profitable core business has competitors that have a new way of doing things that are better than the existing way. The big company that already exists with this profitable way of doing business doesn't want to do it this new way because it will hurt the profits of their pre-existing business. This is like Netflix and cable TV. The cable TV companies didn't really want to do a streaming service because it hurt the profits of their cable business, but they were forced to. And the only way to deal with the innovator's dilemma is to lean into the innovation. That's always the answer. The question is whether or not Google has been doing that. Have they been innovating with their search engine? Or had they been trying to do protectionism and defensiveness with protecting this legacy business? He's asked about this right here.
I think that one of the great challenges that people talk about all the time is you have this enormous business called the blue link economy, search. And that's $307 billion of revenue, not all of it, but a lot of it. And you do not want to hurt or cannibalize that business. Do you say to yourself, as you're thinking about these different AI possibilities and other things, we got to be a little bit slower because we got to protect this other thing over here?
Well, look, I think the area where we applied AI the most aggressively, if anything, in the company was in search, right? The gaps in search quality was all based on transformers. Internally, we call it BERT and MUM, and we made search multimodal. The search quality improvements, we were improving the language understanding of search. That's why we built transformers in the company, right? And if you look at the last couple of years, we have, with AI overviews, Gemini is being used by over 1 billion users in search alone. And I just feel like we are getting started. Search itself will continue to change profoundly in 25. I think we are going to be able to tackle more complex questions than ever before. I think you'll be surprised, even early in 25, the kind of newer things search can do compared to where it is today. So there's always, when you're running in technology, there's some version of innovator's dilemma somewhere.
Right.
There's only one answer to innovator's dilemma every time. You lean into that moment, right? Anything else, you won't be around in a few years' time.
Sundar's answer to the innovator's dilemma is to lean into the moment, to not try to protect this old search business, but to update it, to make it better. He says that already, right now, Gemini, which is the AI summary in front of the Google search, that's being used by billions of people. And even though Andrew says that Google's a blue link economy, it really hasn't been that way for a long period of time. If you do a lot of very popular searches, you'll notice that it doesn't just return blue links. It has far more customized landing pages with way more helpful information. You can search someone's net worth and it brings it up with a nice image and the bold text. It has your answer right there, not just a blue link. You can search movie cast and it'll bring up all the characters. You can search math calculations, it brings up a calculator. You can search translations, it brings up a translator. It doesn't just return links to everything. So what Sundar's saying has credibility. They have leaned into change already with Google search many times throughout history. And I don't see it any different now. What Google's doing is leaning into artificial intelligence. And you can see the same thing by having the AI summaries ahead of their searches. And again, with this question, like many others, Andrew pushes them a little further to get a better answer. Is Google leaning in enough with Google search?
Enough. And I'm going to read you something, and it's a little tough, and you've probably read it. Christopher Mims in the Journal. Yeah. And he says, quote, "The company's core business is under siege. People are increasingly getting answers from artificial intelligence," and he's talking not necessarily about Gemini, and he's saying younger generations are using other platforms to gather information. And that longer term, he suggests that some of the results that are going to be delivered by search engines the value of them is going to be deteriorating because they're going to be flooded. The web is going to be flooded with AI-generated content.
That's a good question. Google's business is under siege because more and more younger people are getting their questions answered through ChatGPT. This is an article that he's referencing from the Wall Street Journal that we just went through on my channel. That article is specifically what Andrew quoted.
Look, the multiple parts to the question. In a world in which you're flooded with like a lot of content, sifting and providing people, if anything, I think something like search becomes more valuable. In a world right. in which you're inundated with content, you're trying to find trustworthy content, content that makes sense to you. In a way, reliably you can use it. I think it becomes more valuable.
This has been one of the common bear cases for Google, is that when there's so much AI content, Google search results will be worthless. There's going to be no reason to use it. But Sundar argues, I believe accurately, that in that world, if that does exist where there's just a bunch of AI garbage everywhere, in that world, companies like Google are going to be even more important. Their job and their mission is going to become even more important to differentiate real, authentic, applicable, real content from all the fake garbage. They're going to have a more important role in that world.
To your previous part about there's a lot of information out there. People are getting it in many different ways. Look, information is the essence of humanity. We've been on a curve on information. Right. When Facebook came around, people had entirely new way of getting information. Right. YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, I can keep going on and on. Through it, right. I think the problem with a lot of those constructs is they are zero sum in their inherent outlook, right? They just feel like people are consuming information in a certain limited way, and people are all dividing that up. But that's not the reality of what people are doing, right? So
this is one of the most common mistakes of investors is zero-sum thinking. Just because there's other ways to find information does not necessarily mean that Google's business is going down. Here's a chart specific to the Google search business of its revenue on a quarterly basis. In Q1 of 2021, it was $31 billion. In Q1 of 2024, it was 46. So Google search is growing rather fast, even now, even with all the new competitors, even with all the kids switching over to other search engines. If all of that was destroying Google search, then we would see it in the numbers, but so far we don't. What we hear about time and time again is the narrative, that it's going to happen down the road, and it never seems to really happen. Now, the next subject he's asked about is a critique of Google's culture. We've all seen the videos of the day in the life of a Google employee, where a Google employee will go on TikTok and show a day in the life, where basically all they're doing is getting chef-made food and spending a lot of time going around. Doesn't seem like they're accomplishing a lot of work. And we've seen this criticism repeated. Google has hired a lot of employees. They get paid a lot of money. And in many cases, they're not required to work as much as other companies. They're not required to work as much in person, or their culture is very, very relaxed. So he's asked about this, which I think is a very fair question to ask.
Yeah. So one of the critiques has been that Google has not been moving fast enough, and that the sort of Elon Musk approach to management of hard charging and going needs to happen. Mark Zuckerberg sort of took this sort of hard charging approach. I was reading the late Charlie Munger had a comment. He had gone to visit Alphabet before he passed away. And he says, "I've been to Google's headquarters. It looked to me like a kindergarten, a very rich kindergarten." And I thought it was a very interesting quote, but I was thinking about it.
That is such a Charlie Munger thing to say. A very rich kindergarten. It's a great quote. I miss Charlie Munger.
The way to look, you take something like Waymo where we are, right? Like, when you're working on technology, you have a clear vision, and you're executing relentlessly and ambitiously. You want to create a culture which can do that over a long period of time. I think there are many different ways to accomplish it. I just think you have to see the track record of what we have done as a company and where we are headed. Just this year alone, take something like Waymo as people used to question whether you can do this. We kind of were at 50,000 rides like 6 months ago, 100,000 autonomous rides per week, 150,000. Last week it was 175. We crossed 1 million autonomous rides per week, right? Like you go.
He outlines the progress of Waymo. He says that 6 months ago, we were at 50,000, then it went up to 100,000. Last week, it was 175,000 last week. And then he says that there's 1 million rides. He misspoke there. He means 1 million miles. Last week, they did 1 million miles covered. So Waymo is scaling rapidly. And this is part of Sundar's greater point that the culture should be a reflection of the work and the output. And what Google's doing is accomplishing a lot. They're scaling Waymo rather fast. They just announced recently that they're moving into Miami in 2 years. So this is going to keep scaling into top cities. And the point here is that you can critique Google's culture, you can make fun of the employees, you can say that it's too lax or whatever, but the results speak for itself. If the culture is so terrible, then why are they continuing to get good results? And I think that this is a decent answer. I also think that Google is changing some of their culture. They've had some things where they're a little bit more strict. They've let go of some employees. They've stopped hiring such an aggressive rate. So I think they are taking into consideration some things, but I don't think that he's going to insult the culture of his company. And then the questions go into Waymo, and specifically who they consider as their top competitors and how fast Waymo is going to scale.
I mean, we've been talking about, I think last time you were here, we talked about autonomous vehicles. And others, including Elon, have talked about them being on the roads a lot sooner than they are now.
Tesla's making amazing progress too. Look, I think, we are in 6 to 7 cities already by the end of this year. We've always it's an area where we have let safety and our metrics guide. Mm-hmm. But I think we are already in the process. May I just walk through the scaling up? I think in the US, by next year, we'll be in 10 cities robustly, right? And in 10 of the major markets. So I think we are making good progress.
And who do you think of as the biggest competition in that space?
I think, obviously, Tesla is the leader in this space. So I think it looks to me like, Tesla, Waymo, I would say those are the top two.
Now, the next question is, what does he think of all the Department of Justice case against Google, the fact that they're being labeled as a monopoly, they're being targeted by many government agencies, many lawsuits against them. How will this impact the business?
I would say this, even through the ruling, the judge commented on that we are clearly the highest quality search engine product out there. And we've gotten to that position by innovating ahead of everyone else. So in that is an acknowledgement of what we have done to do well in this space. You just spent the first 5 minutes asking me about all the competition. So there is something of a kind of a contrast there, I would say.
Well, the question is whether it's an old case. No. Right? That's the thing that that's I think today the big question, given that I occasionally will now look at ChatGPT or other services and find search results.
Look,
Andrew Ross brings up an interesting point here, because Sundar is saying, how can we be a monopoly when the first half of this interview was centered around all the competition we face? So on one side, we have the government saying we're a monopoly, we don't face any competition. On the other side, we say, hey, Google is losing to all this competition from all these LLMs. But Andrew Ross brings up that maybe the government's just late to the party. Maybe Google was a monopoly 5 years ago, the government's suing them based off of that old monopoly they used to have, and now they're getting both the lawsuit and this new competition. Basically the worst of both worlds. What Sundar does here is highlight that Google has always faced competition. This isn't something new. They were never really a true monopoly without competition. They had the motto that competition is literally one click away.
Always argued competition is a click away, particularly on the internet, and it is true, I think, and I think ultimately, look, there's a consumer welfare standard. Like as consumers, all this innovation flowing out from Google, As a company, we are, name any field. We talked about self-driving, AI, quantum computing. We are at the cutting edge of innovation. We provide these services. We open source and publish most of this innovation. The entire AI recent, the transformer architecture, etc. A lot of our products are open source. So we'll vigorously defend. I can't comment on ongoing litigation, but I have deep faith in our judicial system.
He mentions numerous times that they will vigorously defend themselves against these charges and against the idea of breaking up the company, which can go on and most likely will go on for years. And the remedy for Google is likely going to be less intense than what the DOJ is asking for today. What the court ruled on was that Google boxed out competition by defaulting on other browsers. So I believe that the remedy is going to be changed over time. I don't think this lawsuit's going to go through in the first place. And the fact that he points out that they are on the cutting edge of basically all of these new innovations, all of these different things, Google is actively working on all of them, and they don't get much credit for it. It's a company that really is looked at as a loser, even though all the data shows they're winning in a lot of categories. With all the fundamental changes to society as a consequence of AI, he's also asked about regulations, whether or not Sundar believes that AI needs to be heavily regulated, that the government just can't let this technology run free, they have to control it.
Do you have any sense that Washington or any other body, maybe in Europe, is genuinely going to regulate AI? It sort of baffles my mind because we've been talking about regulating social media. We were just talking with Prince Harry about social media, and there's been no real regulation of any sort. I'm not saying there should be. I'm just questioning whether you think there will be.
Look, first of all, to be very clear, we are early enough in this technology. I would generally take a very pro-innovation approach. There is a lot of regulation already in place. So take healthcare. Mm-hmm. It's a very regulated industry. It's not like you can bring a treatment in without going through all the regulatory approvals. Right. So just because you're using AI doesn't change all of that, right? So I think you really want to be careful about what additional regulation, if anything, you need at all, right? Like, you have to get your drugs approved. There's an established process to do that, right? So I would take AI is going to be used for everything from recommending a coffee shop next to you to maybe deciding your insurance to a health decision, right? So I think the phrase regulating AI can be overbroad, right? Or what does it mean? But there'll be areas. Look at the progress. The models are getting more and more realistic around developing synthetic content. Mm-hmm. We have SynthID, we have watermarking, but it's a research area. Over time, like, how does society think about like deep fakes that cause real harm to individuals, etc.? Like, should you have some notions? I think in financial industry, you have notions of fraud. Right. So, I think, but you have to be thoughtful and deliberate and be specific about what you're trying to do.
His answer here is correct. He points out that the US already has a ton of regulations for virtually every type of industry and business. If anything, we have too many regulations in the US. And AI is not just some independent, distinct thing. It enhances different technologies with different businesses. So like he points out, healthcare already has regulations. Whether or not you intermingle AI with healthcare, you're still guided by those regulations. Regulations work with any technology. So trying to just say that AI needs to be regulated doesn't really make sense. What business are you talking about? And what capacity? What specific thing? There's already regulations that guide most of commerce and business, and even the things that he mentioned. Even the things like impersonating people, causing harm, that's fraud. We already have regulations and laws on the book to protect for that. So many of these regulations for AI are already existing laws that just need to be enforced. They're not anything new. So I see this as basically a non-issue. I don't think the US needs all these new AI regulations. If anything, they'll have overlapping laws of overlapping concerns with existing laws. And I think if we go down the path of making a bunch of AI-specific regulations, it would likely only slow down things. Now, finally, we get to the question of whether or not Sundar believes that Google would be better off as a divided up company. Because Google has so many different parts with YouTube and search and the cloud business, you could just start chopping it up, dividing it up. Maybe it would be better off that way.
Divided up. Not the products the way I just described, but, one of the reasons that the company was called Alphabet, changed from Google, was this idea that there were going to be all of these different units, and that technically these units could effectively get spun off into other things. That's what I think the market thought at one point.
Yeah.
And that has not really happened yet. Though maybe it will with something like Waymo.
Yeah, look, some of our other bets, and they are, there are companies in our other bets they are set up with boards. We have outside investors in.
Right.
Just we take a long-term view, and do I expect in a 10-year time frame some of those to be independent public companies? The answer is yes.
Sundar mentions that some of the companies in the other bets section could eventually be sold off as separate companies. They're not always going to just stay with Google, so they could divest some of these new startup companies that they're creating. What he doesn't mention is that companies like Waymo, another other bets company, requires massive amounts of initial funding, tons of capital, billions of dollars to make this company work. Now, eventually, the ROI should be positive. If Waymo becomes a huge ride-hailing network all across the US where you can get a taxi from any airport, that's going to become really valuable. There's going to be a lot of bidders for that technology, but it requires a lot of money up front. And that's why it would be destructive to Google specifically, and more broadly, the entire United States, if all of these big companies were chopped up into smaller parts. In the smaller parts, they can't make the same CapEx investments into other bets like Waymo. Waymo wouldn't exist without Google's pocketbook. They wouldn't have that robotaxi going on making 175,000 rides a week. So this is backed because these big companies have the big search engine and the big profitable business to funnel money into other businesses. That investment is ongoing in part because of the structure of these companies being together. If they broke them up, that would be demolished. You would see far less aggressive investment from these top companies, and GDP as a consequence would probably grow slower. So I think that he's right in saying that some of these companies are going to be sold off in the future, but he should mention that if the companies were broken up, they wouldn't be able to make these investments in the first place. It would lower the amount of investment in the US. Now, that's the entire interview. Let me know what you think of it. If you want me to do more of these, maybe one with Jeff Bezos, maybe I'll do another episode. That's all for now. See you in the next one.